in my theories, and it's certainly not the point of view of most physicists at this time, but in my opinion, and from what I found, and I have lots of evidence and scientific evidence, that there is some truth to what I'm saying, and that is that that in order to have any field, you need a singularity, right? Mm-hmm. You need a point of singularity. You need a black hole, which is an event horizon, a place where the gravitational field around the singularity is not strong enough to pull all the energy in, and some of the energy is allowed to escape. Mm-hmm. So when we're looking at it from this side, we see it as an atom, as a sun, as a center of a galaxy. We know that all centers of galaxies are black holes. Since the Hubble, we have been able to map that out. And lately, we found that 7 of the black holes we found are 7 times the mass of our sun. 7 times exactly. Mm-hmm. And the 8th one that we've mapped out is 14 times the mass of our sun, or twice 7. That is a pattern, you see? Yeah. And the pattern includes our sun, you see? Because the sun is in those ratios. Mm-hmm. So that supports the idea that the sun is actually a black hole. And we're looking at it from this side of the event horizon, and we're seeing heat.
We're seeing the energy coming off the black hole.
Correct.
It hasn't absorbed.
That's right. We're seeing the boundary where gravity is not strong enough to pull all the energy in, so the energy that escapes appears to us as 3D reality.
That's incredible.
Mm-hmm. It's very exciting.
Is there a way to harness this energy?
Yes. You see, there's another... So, without getting too lost in the whole... in the whole theory of it, there's a very interesting, we got to understand now that what I'm saying is that infinite fits in finite, mm-hmm. right? Because we got a singularity inside a boundary.
Yes.
Okay? So, people say, well, that would mean that each atom is infinite, mm-hmm. and that I contain infinity. Well, in general, people will tell me, I don't feel too infinite this morning, But, you see, actually, in geometry, that's quite demonstrable. Mm-hmm. Infinite and finite are actually complementary, not opposites. Mm-hmm. For instance, if you take the distance between 1 and 2 on a ruler, mm-hmm. you could consider that as a boundary. And you could divide that boundary 0.5, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again, to infinity. You will never reach the end. Mm. Yet, you've confined it to a boundary. And if you apply that to an atom, we've built huge particular accelerator to break the atom down,
Tiny pieces, each one smaller.
Each one smaller. And we're getting to incredible, the machine is getting bigger, but the particle we're breaking is getting smaller.
It proves the universe is infinitely small as well as infinitely large.
Correct. And that it is actually a boundary within a boundary within a boundary, so it's a bounded universe that's infinite, mm-hmm. right? And there's very interesting links to philosophy and consciousness now, and because now you understand that if each point contains the whole, then each point has all the information. Now, let's go back to our blind person with the Rubik's Cube. Okay, now, we told him to solve the equation. We didn't give him any information. Mm-hmm. But now we're just going to give him one piece of information, yes or no, every time he makes a move. And now he's moving still at 1 moves a second. And we're saying yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Well, now it's not 26 billion years that it will take. It will only take him 2 minutes to finish the equation, to finish the cube. Mm-hmm. And so we've got a drastic time differential. So if we, then it starts to make sense. Oh, the Earth came together in 12 billion years. Mm-hmm. You see? It starts to fall into the possibilities. So the atom actually knows, yes, no, yes, no. It knows, it has these patterns. It's learned before. So it has information. It's retaining information. And it's connected, interconnection in space. It's connected to all other atoms because each one is a center. Get this. If it's a boundary within a boundary within a boundary to infinity, there is no point from which I can connect or calculate a center. So each point is the center. Each point contains the whole. Each point is a point of stillness that maintains the spin. Without the stillness, no spin can occur. And all we see is the spin, not the stillness. We see what radiates from the singularity, from the stillness, the eye of the hurricane, the eye of the galaxy.
Then it's possible to tap energy from each individual point.
Yes. There's definitely a possibility to do this. And we have to understand a little better now that, you see, well, let's continue on how, before we get to this, just so we understand better, how infinite fits in finite. So I give the example of the ruler. Well, in geometry, how would that look? Well, let's take a look. On the computer, I can generate, this is called the Koch curve. It was a mathematician that mapped out the first fractal systems. And here we see a boundary, yes, and in that boundary, we've put a triangle, an equilateral triangle. And then we put a reverse triangle in it. We continue with the next frequency, and we have the same geometry. Everybody sees here, we have the same geometry. And then again, the same geometry. But now it's important to keep adding the boundaries. All information in all points. Boundaries within boundaries. And again, the next level of boundaries. And again, the next level of boundaries. And now I got lazy, I didn't put them all around. And then it gets so small we can't see. But you see, if I give this to a computer, the computer can go crazy with this equation. I will never exceed my initial boundary. I've fit infinite into finite. This can be done in 3 dimensions. The boundary could be a sphere, and the triangles tetrahedrons. And this is where my geometry, the mapping of the basic geometry, or the root geometry, what I believe is the root geometry of the universe, started to come out of my work. So, in coordinates with this, we have to understand that the atom is made of a very high percentage of space.
That's true.
That's right.
The atom is mostly space.
Mostly space, 99.99999%. The 0.00001% we call reality is an electromagnetic wave, light. So we could define reality as a little bit of light jiggling in space. Well, there's been a lot of evidence that space is actually not empty, but that it's full. And it's full of an energy that creates the atom, according to me. Okay? This is the energy that creates the atom. It's known in quantum mechanics as the 0 point energy. And it's thought to be in flux.
So you would define space as being full of energy instead of having hydrogen atoms interspersed over.
Well, the hydrogen atom emerged from the energy of space. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, because even with the Big Bang, where did the atom come from?
Right.
Where did that big ball of atom come from? Must have emerged from something. Well, you don't have anything else than space. Okay? So space is full, not empty.
Well, even Einsteinian physics, energy creates it.
Yes. Einstein believed in the fullness of space. In some cases, he mentions it. He talked about a heater. It was known as a heater at the time. And Maxwell's equation and so on showed this. And lately, the Casimir effect showed that the fullness of space, people ask, well, how come we can't detect that energy? Well, it's really difficult to detect an energy that's in everything at such a high percentage.
Mm-hmm.
You see? Because even in the instrument you're going to use to detect it, it's in it.
Yeah.
So you set the instrument at 0, and in fact, it's 100% because it's made of that energy.
It contains the same energy.
That's right. And so
and you would need a filter to pass through the energy that exists in the equipment.
Exactly. Well, that's what Casimir said. He said, well, just a minute, if we put two plates close enough together, a micron apart, the long wave of the energy in space, the 0 point, won't be able to get in between the plates. And we should get a pressure effect on the plates together because the long wave will be outside of the plates.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody could put two plates close enough, a micron apart, till very lately. Mr. Lamoureux did it in his laboratories, and sure enough, the plate came together. So this is physical, mechanical evidence of the 0 point being in the fabric of space. And where my work comes in is where I say, yes, it's in space, but it is structured. It uses a specific set of geometry to create reality. You see?
It'd be interesting that you could actually do construction in space if you had everything a micron even. You would just put the pieces together and they would fit.
And they would fit. Very good. That's one of the applications. So it's very incredible. But now when we calculate the energy of space, then it's even more incredible. Because when the calculations are done, the energy in space is just enormous. It's in the order of 10 to the 94 grams per centimeter square. Okay, that's the density of space. 10 with 94 zeros. Okay, now to give you an idea of what that means, if we took all the atoms in the known universe, right, with the biggest telescope, which is the Hubble, and we made an edge, okay, we made a boundary, and we said, okay, we take all these atoms and we compress them in a centimeter cube of space.
Mm-hmm.
That space would still not have the energy density of the 0 point, 10 to the 94 grams per centimeter cube.
And you're working on tapping the energy at the 0 point.
That's right. So my theories has been that if then it has a structure, because you see, when it creates reality, it creates it under very specific structures. Right behind us is the Earth, the Moon. What are those geometry? If we look around us, does Mother Nature make cube planets? No. It knows one trick. It makes a sphere.
Mm-hmm.
You see? And it makes a sphere at the cellular level, at the planetary level, at the suns and stars and so on. So it makes spheres, and then it puts them together in different ways and makes different stuff. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But basically it makes a sphere. So how does the sphere pops out into hyperspace? How does it come out? How does it create reality? Well, then you understand that
it gets hatched. Right.
It gets hatched. That's right. It's the chicken or the egg. Well, the sphere is the highest volume possible.
Mm.
So it's the most unstable. Well, imagine all this density of space, and now the sphere appears. That unstable geometry wouldn't be able to appear like this. So what I'm saying is that there's a lower frequency of geometry that maintains the sphere in hyperspace.
But the sphere, well, gravitationally speaking,
Mm-hmm.
each point on the surface of the sphere
Mm-hmm.
is equidistant from the center.
Correct. Yes.
So therefore, it's an equilibrium.
It's an equilibrium, but it's a weak geometry because of its surface. You see, its surface is the largest surface possible. So it's unconceivable that this large surface could emerge out of this density of space. That's what I'm saying. It must be maintained by a lower frequency of generated by a lower volume to maintain it. And there is evidence in space of this lower volume existing in the spheres of planets and suns and so on. And what I'm saying is that the lower lines of force that maintains the sphere in space is the tetrahedron. And the tetrahedron is the smallest volume possible. Here is an isotropic vector matrix. This is a three-dimensional then tetrahedron. It's made of 4 faces that are equilateral triangle, and it's actually the smallest volume. Okay? Thus, the more stable volume, the most stable volume. And what I'm saying is that the sphere emerges because of 2 tetrahedron in hyperspace, a male and a female tetrahedron, polarizing the sphere, and then the sphere emerges. And it's very good that you spoke about the equilibrium, because when you put 8 tetrahedrons together, you get a geometry that's called the vector equilibrium, which is the only geometry in full equilibrium in all vectorial possibilities. And so this, as I moved through my mathematics and the geometry, I ended up building what I believe is the basic grid of time and space that generates the sphere, which is a 64 tetrahedral grid that makes a vector equilibrium in the middle. So what I'm saying is that in the middle of this is a vector equilibrium. And today we don't have time to go into many details in this, but it emerges from the center, and this is basically 2 isotropic vector metrics pushed into each other. 2 of these, which Buckminster Fuller, a geometrist, very famous geometrist, believed to be the basic mathematical blueprint of the universe. And basically what I've done is I've put 2 of these base to base together, and I've added 24 tetrahedrons to give a 64 tetrahedral grid, which I'm showing you here on this crystal.
And you have 4 more tetrahedrons on the inside.
Here I'm showing that there is an asymmetry in the middle of the matrix. Let me show you maybe on the computer. But at the same time, we'll move a little bit through some of the graphics I'm going to show you. But I'm going to show you what these were very significant, because this is half of a vector equilibrium. It's half of this geometry. The ones that are blue, you see, are half
Why
of this.
don't planets come out like this in a sphere?
Because this is spinning.
Ah, very good.
And so when spin is added, the sphere emerges, which is the highest volume possible. And that is the curve, the curvature of space. So let's take a look a little bit here. And we saw the Bosch curve. And interestingly, as we see through the crop circle, they seem to, whoever is doing these objects in the hay, I mean, that's a big jump we're doing right now, but let's take a look here. Well, this crop circle occurred last summer, and whoever is doing this is definitely not 2 old Englishmen stomping in the hay.
With boards on their feet.
That's right. Here the crops are actually woven to show actually in 3 dimension the double star tetrahedron that I was talking to you about, and it gives the geometry of the Koch curve that I just showed you, how infinity fits into finite. But no, there's no circle around the outside. However, the boundary is implied because the circles here would be where the next frequency on the holographic grid would be. And so the circles are implied in the boundary. This is very encouraging for my research, that there's actually whoever is doing these things, and I'm not going to postulate on this, but they're trying to tell us something about hyperspace, as I understand it. Imagine that you open a comic book, and that the people in the comic book were alive. And you wanted to tell them you're here, but now you're screaming at them, they're looking up, they're in 2D, they can't see you. So, what do? You make them a little drawing. And maybe in the drawing, you would give them the geometry of your reality. Maybe that would be a cube. And they would understand, oh, the person that's doing this is in another frequency. And maybe you could give them the information on how to get to 3D. So this is a crop circle that occurred again a little later on, almost about 2 weeks later after the other one. So the people that are doing this, whoever that are doing this, were insisting on that geometry. And interestingly, when you take the central part of that crop circle and you overlay the octahedron cavity of my crystal, when you have the 64 crystals put together, when you overlay that geometry with the right rotation, the octahedron cavity makes exactly the central piece. So the crop circle actually gives you all of the information to build that crystalline structure I was talking to you about. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, the creation of crop circles is intelligently guided.
It seemed to be, you know, there's a lot of evidence that support the fact that these crop circles are not the result of, you know, the hoax are easily detectable. The one that don't have hoax that are not hoax or that genuine seem to have high level of neutrinos in them, which is usually created by nuclear fusion, certainly not in nature. There's clumps in the earth afterwards. There's also there's change at the molecular structure in the hay. That's
the detection of magnetic fields.
There's a detection of magnetic fields. So there's all sorts of interesting phenomena.
Now that previous circle, someone once told me, the previous crop circle
yes.
that you showed, that is actually the equation for infinity, or?
Yes. Well, that's what I was showing you earlier, is that Bach curve that you can continue to infinity and still have a boundary around it. So it's really interesting that they're showing that specific geometry that I have been using for years to map out the geometry of space-time, of hyperspace. So, you know, my belief is that they're trying to tell us about the geometry of life or the geometry of the universe.
Do you find this geometry in other structures on the planet?
Yes, in other structures in the universe. And we actually, when you look at the way cells develop in the human body, and we'll take a look later on, maybe if we have time, of how the cells develop in the human body, they actually develop under that very specific fractal geometry of 4 cells making 8, 30, 16, 32, 64, and so on. 64 being the key number here to my geometry. So actually there's physical evidence you can touch that the human body is based on that specific geometry. Isn't that incredible? Now, not only that, but if you look at how these cells actually came together, they make this star tetrahedron that I was talking to you about. Those 2 tetrahedrons put together. If I put a sphere around each of these tetrahedron, they intersect making these petals in the octahedron cavity. Well, that's exactly how the first 8 cells of your human body developed. And then they went to 16, like I said, 32 and 64. But what made them develop in that specific geometry? What code gives them that geometry? The DNA structure, which is 20 amino acid that is generated by 64 codes, the codons. The 64 codons that generates the DNA structure. So again, you get all that same mathematics. It's all there, even at the human level, at the human body. And that's where, in philosophy and in understanding of consciousness, it starts making sense. All information in the universe generating atomic structure from which consciousness emerge, information emerge. So when we go back to the isotropic vector metrics from Buckminster Fuller, here we can see it from 2 different angles. We find that if we isolate the octahedron cavities in the middle, if that's just a space in the middle, we find these 4 ones that were in blue that you were asking about. Well, I didn't know what they were doing there, and it was an anomaly for me. And here shown in the whole isotropic vector matrix. Well, when you look at the universe is polarized, so they would have to be two isotropic, a male and a female, a positive and negative, atomic and anti-atoms, right, and so on. So I added one, but that makes an egg. You see, it doesn't make the sphere. So you have to push one into the other. Well, I didn't want to deform the metrics. I didn't want to deform the mathematics, but eventually I did. And when I did, I realized I didn't have to deform anything because the metrics, the male metrics, is ready to accept the female one because it has these four spaces in it ready to accept the reverse metrics, making the vector equilibrium the only geometry that makes a full equilibrium in all vectorial possibilities.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's very exciting, and you know, metaphorically, this is the male and the female coming together to generate life, and it was a very exciting moment in my research when I discovered this. And so actually, the matrix is ready to accept the reverse one, and this then is the vector equilibrium. And this is the geometry at the center of the matrix when the matrix is completed. This is an isolation of the center of the matrix. So this is all, and then I added the 24 tetrahedron to complete the matrix, and it became eight tetrahedrons making an octahedron cavity coming together to create 64 crystal tetrahedrons. You know, which I consider to be the geometry of time and space. Now we gotta remember that each tetrahedron has, okay, well, this is the vector equilibrium in the middle, and again, a crop circle occurred that showed a two-dimensional vector equilibrium. And here we'll see when we put the two-dimensional vector equilibrium in 3D, thus when we move this into 3D, we get the true vector equilibrium. And when we put a sphere around each of the each of the tetrahedrons, we get a very ancient symbol that is called the seed of life, that is shown in that crop circle.
Very similar to a Celtic symbol.
Yes, Celtic symbol and Egyptian symbol known as the flower of life. And so this is, and then again, this when we put a sphere around each of the tetrahedrons, we actually are reproducing how the cell of the human body are developing. And again, to reenter, the cell are being placed in these positions by the DNA structure, which is directed by the 64 code. We see the mathematics are very important here.
Have you found any evidence of ancient civilizations also discovering or working on this problem?
Yeah, this is what is the most puzzling, is that I actually found that a lot of the ancient civilization used these specific numbers. For instance, the number 7 was widely used in most of the religious belief around the earth in ancient civilization. And it's interesting that there is exactly 7 spins ratio to a tetrahedron. So if you were to do an equal spin on a tetrahedron, right, or you would spin it from one point to the middle of each face, which is 4 times, right? This way, and this way, and this way, and this way, right? And then, so that's 4 spins, and then you'd find that you can spin it equally as well this way, edge, middle from one edge to middle from the other edge, this way, and this way. And so that 3 other spin, thus 7. The 7 spin of the tetrahedron, the 7 octave of the the 7 notes of the octave, and remember now, we have 7 black holes showing 7 times the mass of our sun, and an 8 black hole showing 14 times the mass of our sun in that octave ratio system.
Definite symmetry.
That's right. That's right. And that symmetry seems to be coherent with the spin symmetry of the tetrahedron.
Now, have you found that there's a similarity, like with Egyptian pyramids or, say, Mayan construction?
Yes. In the short time we have, I don't have time to show you all my slides, but there's incredible coherency in the ancient text. First of all, none of the ancient texts, for instance, the Book of the Dead of the Egyptian, or the pyramid texts, or the Mayan codices, none of these traditions, even China, which we have found pyramids, there's 100 pyramids in China, the pictures have now been released, there's pyramids in Japan that were just found under the water. None of these civilizations ever claimed to have built these buildings. None of these civilizations ever claimed to have known the mathematics, ever claimed to have had the knowledge. They all said somebody came here.
Previous.
Yes. And built these things, and we witnessed it, and we called them the sun gods. They came here in flying ship. In the Egyptian tradition, they call them flying boat. But in, for instance, the Vedic texts in India, they specifically call them flying machine, right? And so what I'm saying is that these monuments seem to have been built as technologies, not as tombs. There is never a pharaoh found in
underneath
any.
The pyramid.
That's right, and it's a misconception. It's an assumption. It's a theory that was put forward in the 1800s by the archaeologists at the time. But we must understand that some of these pyramids we had to dynamite to get in, because they were plugged with huge plugs of granite. And when we got in, the center of the pyramid was still empty. So
there's no pharaoh ever been found in a pyramid.
Correct. So what I'm saying here is that the pyramid is actually a resonance cavity. And in that resonance cavity, a field, a hyperdimensional field is generated. And what is missing inside of it is a crystalline structure turning in a plasma field, creating the focusing lens for that hyperfield to generate the singularity, what I call the singularity, the point where the universe goes to infinite curve. And we link up, if you will, we log on to the universal holographic geometry. And now we have a link to the universe, an opening, a wormhole opening to us.
And it would produce incredible energy.
It would produce incredible energy. It could have amazing application, gravitational fields, regenerations of cells, all sorts of alteration of metals, all sorts of things could be done. And most out there, maybe of my theories, but one of the one that touched me the most is that if this is true, then you would basically be opening a feedback loop where you would look through the black hole, through to infinity, and back at yourself, So you would be interacting with the consciousness of the universe. You would be amplifying your consciousness, your power to generate to universal forces.
Well, there'd be no such thing as time.
That's right. You would
see your beginning and your own ending.
That's right. And it's interesting that you can show that in a very simple experiment. If you point a camera back at the TV in a closed loop, the TV shows what the camera is filming, and you take the camera and you point it back at the TV, you'll see the frames rotate, and when you focus into the light, all of a sudden you'll see the spiral open, and you've created a feedback loop, and you enter a wormhole into dimension. It's very interesting.
Incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you intend your research to lead?
Well, I'm looking at actually building this technology. You see, I believe that this technology was brought to this planet thousands of years ago, thousands of years prior to our written history, and that all the information to rebuild it was left in ancient texts. And I took a little bit of a different line of approach, but I certainly linked up with that information at one point, and it helped me tremendously to understand what I was dealing with. I actually believe that this technology was taken out of the pyramids by a person called Moses, that was son of Pharaoh for 40 years before he learned that he was Hebrew. And what do we find in the Hebrew tradition, in the Old Testament? What is the most what's the center of the Hebrew faith? An object that's called the Ark of the Covenant of God. And when you find, and so when you, what is the word God in the Bible? It comes from a word, the tetragrammaton. Tetragrammaton. Theta for 4, grammaton for letters or grammar, the 4 letters of God. But tetra can as well be interpreted as tetrahedron, and grammaton has an etymology of gram in relation to weight or an effect of gravity. So now we have something very similar to what I found. I mean, that's not the only thing that I based on to believe that this technology was a crystalline grid based on crystal tetrahedrons. But for instance, if we look at the Kabbalistic texts, we find that they give a specific geometry of the Kabbalistic tree, and I wish we had time to look at it today. But when you see the geometry of the Kabbalistic tree, you can decode it to give exactly this crystalline grid.
Kabbalistic referring to Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism.
The Jewish mysticism, exactly. So all the information seemed to be there. And where I'm going with this, to answer your question, I took a little detour there, is to bring us to a new level of technology. I think we're at a point where our technology is either gonna destroy us, or we're gonna jump a wall. We're gonna go to a new level. You see, and I think the reason why our technology is mostly destructive is because we only understand the radiation side of the universe. We only understand from the event horizon outward. Yes. We don't understand the contractive side of the universe, what I call the general active side of the universe, what generates instead of what alienates, what radiates. And that is contraction, going to 0 Kelvin. What I'm saying is that in order for a field to occur in the 0 point, you have a pressure differential from 0 Kelvin to extremely hot at the event horizon. And that is what makes the curvature of space happen. It's a pressure differential in the 0 point energy that creates the field. And thus, thermodynamics are a loop. Extremely cold and extremely hot is a loop. And depending on where you are, you define it.
One's the absence of heat, and one's the presence.
The presence, yes. And it's all in relation to your observation, in relation to the event horizon. There's evidence of this. If the sun is a black hole, well, get this. When you look at the sun, the corona of the sun is much hotter than the surface of the sun itself. Well, that's reverse according to our thermodynamics laws. The surface of the sun should be hotter than the corona, but it's reversed. So it seems to be getting colder as you get closer to the center. And interestingly, the surface of the sun is too cold and doesn't generate enough neutrinos to support the theory that the sun is burning because of thermodynamic fusion. And so, yet, in a black hole situation, neutrinos could not escape. And so, they would be a low percentage of emission of neutrino.
What then is your opinion of cold fusion?
I think cold fusion then, if proven, accurate, and there's cold fusion cells now that seem to be repeatable on a very steady base in different laboratories. I think all that's happening here is that there's a certain coherence in the 0 point. We're starting to tap into that field, and the coherence is not necessarily linked to thermodynamics. We don't necessarily need to heat up at incredible levels to generate the energy. We can just create a certain coherence in the field, in the flux of hyperspace, in the 0 point, and the energy downloads automatically. You could even call a generator a coherence in the 0 point. The N machine, for instance, from Mr. De Palma, Dr. De Palma.
Yes.
Yes.
It's in New Zealand.
Yes. A magnet turning on its own. No differential magnets like in a generator. You got a magnet, another one turning, you got electricity. This one is turning on its own and generating electricity. It's creating a coherency. John Hutchinson in Canada makes a little cell where he crushes crystals and then heats them up and then zap them at high voltage, and then they start emitting electricity at a constant rate for 10 years or longer. And with no iteration, nothing. You just tap into it and you have, and so these are starting to show technology and evidence that it's possible to tap into that 0 point.
So in the future, we're going to have little tetrahedral cars that...
Yeah, hopefully they won't have to roll. We'll have little tetrahedral spaceship. Yes, that will be able to alter or create gravitational fields and so on. See,
do we sit on top of them on the point?
Hopefully not. We'll hopefully sit around them and control it with our consciousness. Control the direction of the field with our consciousness. It will be directly linked through the 64 codons of our DNA structure into our being through our consciousness and will. It's called symbiotic technology. And that might sound very out there, but the militaries now have made some symbiotic technology with their fighter planes that are so sensitive that they have to be controlled by the mind of the pilot himself. And as the computer is linked with the wave brain, and the computer is directing the ship through the wave brain. Brainwave, I'm sorry. And so, it's, this is not, I'm not talking of something that's very far in our technology. Symbiotic technology is coming along. And I think, but, if we tap in this universal consciousness, it's gonna be more than just a computer registering brainwaves. It's going to be, I think, a much more profound experience. I believe that these, this structure can be generated quite easily, and it will be a very big advancement in human consciousness and a very big advancement in technology, and we're going that way.